Perfect. Don't hesitate to ask questions because I'm here to answer them. So let's just go kind of big picture for a second. You guys have probably all heard me discuss this and you're probably sick of it by now. But I want us kind of zero in. So the big question has always been, what can PTs, OTs, speech therapists, what can we do to help the Medicare population, Medicare beneficiaries, without violating federal laws, regulations, but still bringing the best of what we have to offer, you know? And so most of you have a basic understanding that when it comes to Medicare, the accepted standard right now is we cannot opt out of Medicare. And just to clarify the language, there's essentially three, we'll call it conditions that we would be working under. One is we choose to be a participating provider with Medicare. We contract with Medicare, we accept assignment with Medicare, and we are participating providers. Option number two is we choose to be non-participating providers. In that situation, non-par, we're still contracted with Medicare. We still sign the contract, apply to be contracted. Now we have a choice to accept assignment or not accept assignment. And if we don't accept assignment, we're still under all the same regulatory burden as a participating provider, but it opens the door to allow providers to charge just a little bit more. Basically, you get reimbursed at 95% of the Medicare fee schedule, but you're allowed to bill the beneficiary an extra 15%. So that's a conversation for another time if you want to discuss the differences between par and non-par, but ultimately from compliance standards, you're held to the same level of compliance and you have all the same regulatory burden. Number three would be you're completely unaffiliated with Medicare. You don't have a contract in place. You're not a provider, par, non-par, nothing like that. You have no association. The biggest issue here when we talk about being able to opt out and treat Medicare beneficiaries is if you provide covered services, you are required by federal law to submit a claim for those services. It's called the Mandatory Claim Submission Law. You can go ahead and research it. In the document you see on the screen that I'm sharing, you see the Medicare Benefit Policy Manual. I've shared this before, but I'm going to keep sharing it because not enough people know about it. Section 40, this is where you have all the information about being able to opt out, not opt out, mandatory claim submission, all that stuff. But the biggest issue, and I think the biggest thing that always stands out for me, is when you take a look at this section specifically, and you look at the first paragraph here under the only situation in which a non-opt-out physician or practitioner, that's us, that's PT, OT, and speech, is allowed, are not required to submit a claim to Medicare for covered services when the beneficiary or the beneficiary's legal representative refuses of his or her own free will to authorize the submission of a bill. Okay, so a lot of people will take that sentence right there and basically obviously consult with an attorney and they'll draft up documents to say, well, this person is refusing of their own free will to let me submit a claim. Okay, that's great. Like if that's the route you want to go. But I think the confusion then lies in the fact that it doesn't allow you to charge your standard cash rate, assuming that's higher than the Medicare allowed amount. So you're still stuck with what Medicare has determined is a fair reimbursement for your services. And that's where you look here and it says, however, the limits on what the physician, practitioner, supplier may collect from the Medicare beneficiary continue to apply to charges for the covered service, notwithstanding absence of the Medicare claim. So if your standard bill rate is $200 for an hour of therapy, it doesn't matter. Like even if the patient says, I refuse to let you submit a claim, you still can't charge above the maximum charge, the limiting charge Medicare has established. So the goal here in this live is to really touch on and look at the question that was posted, I think yesterday. well, what if we're doing wellness? How do we determine what's a covered service, what's not a covered service? Because if you're providing a non-covered service, you are free to charge whatever rate you charge the standard population. You're not limited to the Medicare allowed amount. Now, of course, some of you are charging less than the Medicare allowed amount. And, again, another topic for another discussion. I'm going to focus today on mobile PTs, OTs, and speech therapists who are traveling to the patient's home, who in reality, you can't charge $50 an hour, $80 an hour, probably can't even charge $150 an hour and still maintain a profitable business solely as a mobile provider. You have to work enough profit margin into what you're doing, not just to survive, but to grow your business, to thrive, to be able to have enough extra capacity in what you're doing so that if you want to do something different, extra, more or less, you have a solid profit margin in there, So I want you to understand that it's not about gouging the consumer. It's not about overcharging. It's about you have a very specific idea of the patient experience you want to deliver. And my guess is you can't deliver it profitably for the allowed Medicare reimbursement. But that's okay, because there's ways that you can work within the system. And that's what we're going to discuss here today. That if you're looking at a mobile practice, you determine obviously what your revenue rate has to be. I have a hard time seeing a mobile clinician being able to operate for less than average of $250, $300 in revenue an hour. Just because you want to be able to make up for what happens if the patient can't, they cancel a session, or the patient gets sick, or the patient is hospitalized, and all these other things that come into play. You need extra capacity to deliver the level of service you want to deliver. You're not in the business of high volume unit production. You're in the business of one-on-one individualized care, premium services, and that's what we want you to be able to do. So let's take a look at some of the guidelines here outside of opting out. The main thing that you need a solid understanding of, I'm going to come back up so you see the table of contents, and then we'll jump down to the section. You need a solid understanding of what's a covered service, because if you're not providing covered services, then you're not held responsible for the mandatory claim submission. And I'll tell you where kind of the trap lies for a lot of clinicians. But basically, if you come down to section 220.2, reasonable and necessary, Medicare essentially, I'm not going to go through all this, but Medicare essentially covers rehabilitative care and maintenance care. Okay, that's been established for a long time. Certainly you need to be familiar whether you decide, that you're going to be a par provider or non-par or unaffiliated. You need to understand what is Medicare's definition of reasonable and necessary, what is a covered service and what is not. And then that opens the door for you. So the first thing that I would do is I would read these two documents I'm going to share with you today. And I would start to create a structure that allows you to make clinical decisions and support those decisions. And think of it for a second from the other side. For decades, we've had to support medical necessity. We've had to come up with ways to determine this is a skilled service. This should be covered by insurance reimbursement. Now, all of a sudden, you're flipping that on its head and you're saying, well, wait a minute. Maybe this isn't something that should be covered. It could still be skilled. It could still, require a high level of expertise, but that doesn't mean it's a covered benefit. There's lots of things that are not covered benefits that still require exceptional knowledge, skill, as a professional. They need your background. So I always love going straight to the examples, and I've shared these examples with you, so forgive me if I'm repeating, but I think this is important because this is where you're going to establish your policy to say this person requires covered services or this person does not required covered services. But you need something to back up your decision, just like you do when you're providing covered care. So when I'm looking down here, so right now we're on page 177 of the document. And these go through everything from speech therapy to occupational therapy to physical therapy. But like this one, as an example, you know, a patient with MS needs a maintenance program to slow or prevent the deterioration in communication ability caused by the medical condition. Therapy services from a qualified speech therapist may be covered to establish the maintenance program, even though the patient's current medical condition does not yet justify the need for therapy. Evaluation, establishment of the program, training the family may require the skills of a therapist and would be covered. Note in this example, the skills of the therapist are not required to actually carry out the maintenance program. This is super important. And as a result are not covered. So let's take this scenario for a minute. I know some of you are par, non-par providers with Medicare. And I know some of you are looking to grow the cash side of your practice. So if we take this scenario that's printed and published and shared by CMS, and we set up our criteria, our clinical guideline within our practice model to say, okay, whether I'm speech, PT, OT, it doesn't matter. This person comes to me. The most common, I think, is Parkinson's, right? So a patient comes referred, they have Parkinson's, maybe they have diabetes, maybe they have some hypertensive issues. Certainly there are some medical complexities in the case. Let's say that they've fallen once or twice previously in the last 12 months, and the family is coming to you because now they want this individual to start working out with you. They've heard about you. They've heard about the things that you can do for people with Parkinson's, and they want to hire you to provide services. Okay. What do you do? So the cleanest, easiest situation is you provide a physical therapy or occupational therapy evaluation. In that evaluation, you go through a set of screening tools that you have chosen to determine medical necessity. And so let's say, you look at the complexities, the comorbidities. Yes, they have hypertension, but it's being medically managed and they've had it for the last 5 years. Yes, they have, high blood sugars, but they're being medically managed and they've had this for the last 10 years. Yes, they've fallen a couple times in the past 12 months, but the individual is living alone in the home independently. Maybe their spouse has passed. They dressed themselves before they came to therapy. Maybe they drive, maybe they don't. They're able to feed themselves. They're able to bathe themselves. They're able to handle their checkbook and accounting. And, so you create your list of criteria, and they while they're suffering from symptoms associated with Parkinson's disease, you rule out dementia, you rule out cognitive issues. And you determine, look, I can show this person or their family members what to do. They can repeat what I've showed them safely. If I had a personal trainer that I was able to show the programming to, that personal trainer would be able to take this individual through the program that I've created. Okay, so now we start to have this structure, right? The initial evaluation, the first visit, maybe even the second visit, qualify as covered services. They're submitted on a claim to Medicare. But then at that point, you professionally determine that now carrying out the activities is not covered service anymore. Now this would be considered, independent services, and they can hire you as a therapist to provide these services, or they could hire a personal trainer, a massage therapist, or whomever. And I want to show you the example of that side of things. So if we jump over to chapter 30, where we're looking at the Abn Form. Now, this is only for people who are already contracted as par or non-par providers. I'm going to talk about the ones who aren't contracted in just a minute. So stay with me. Hey, David, thanks for joining. So what I would do is I would look at, again, published guidelines from Medicare. We're going to jump down here to Chapter 50 or Section 50. We're going to look at triggering events. And so there's information in here about when to issue a mandatory ABN, a voluntary ABN, like all of your guidelines are here. That's what I like about working with Medicare is as much as it seems confusing when you don't know where to find your answers, pretty much you can find the answer to everything if you know what you're looking for. And so in here, as an example, and this is where I'd create my policy. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you guys can see it better. So this is another speech therapy example, but you could easily use this for PT or OT. So Mrs. X has been receiving covered outpatient speech services. In your case, in the case we were just talking about, they got the eval, they got the plan of care, they got the education. Okay. She's met her treatment goals. She's been given exercises to do at home that do not require the therapist's intervention. Mrs. X wants the speech therapist to continue to work with her, even though continued therapy is not medically necessary or reasonable. Mrs. X is issued an ABN prior to her speech therapist resuming therapy that is no longer considered medically necessary. And when you look at the instructions on the ABN, it asks for reasons why it's not a covered service anymore. And this is where you would get your support to say that it's not medically necessary. We did the covered stuff, the eval, the assessment, the training and teaching and goal setting and all that stuff. That was covered. Now actually carrying out the program is not a covered service. Hence, the beneficiary is able to pay the $200 an hour or whatever the pricing program is that you're offering for your services. You know, and that's where, for me, the hybrid model of being able to be a participating provider, in addition to being able to offer non-covered services, I think is the perfect marriage that allows the individual beneficiary to come to you through the Medicare system, utilize the benefits that they've paid for, but then still receive the patient experience and the kind of services that only you are able to provide. Because let's face it, what's going to happen if this individual goes to a more conventional care? And hey, that's me. I run a conventional care clinic, right? But no matter what, I cannot provide the same experience that you can provide because I'm receiving $103 average reimbursement for 4 units of one-on-one care from Medicare. When you could provide, you know, an exceptional experience at a $200 reimbursement rate, there's just a difference. You know, no matter how well-intentioned I am, I'm limited to what Medicare is willing to pay for. And Medicare is very clearly stated what they're willing to pay for, and they're not necessarily willing to pay for the experience that you can provide. So I hope I don't lose you guys too much with that back and forth, but I just want you to understand, you know, again, it's somebody goes in to buy a car, right? A car can be a Honda Civic, or a car could be, you know, a Bentley. Like, the price points are very different. A Bentley costs more because the experience of driving a Bentley is very different. Not that I would know. Okay, I want to show you one more kind of example here, back to when it is medically necessary, right? Like, this shows us, and I can give you countless examples of when it's not medically necessary. But let's talk for a second about an example that would be medically necessary. This way you can kind of see the other side. Let me see if I can find it here. Okay, this one right here at the top, I'm cutting off some of it. So this is a situation example. It's number 3. Where there is an unhealed, unstable fracture that requires regular exercise to maintain function until the fracture heals, the skills of a therapist. Try to get away from using skilled care. Try to stay with the phrasing, does this require the skills of a therapist? So in this situation, unhealed fracture, the skills of a therapist may be needed to ensure that the fractured extremity is maintained in proper position and alignment during the range of motion. In this case, since the skills of a therapist may be required to safely carry out the maintenance program, given the particular patient's special medical complications, therapy services would be covered. So this is where you're using your expertise. And what I would say is, if you, and this was brought up, I drove clients Bentley for a summer. Wow, David, sweet. Somebody was asking about wellness and the screening process and how do we determine if an eval is medically necessary. And I think you're dead on. You're exactly right. Basically, what the workflow would look like is, so I'm going to take that same patient with Parkinson's, and we're going to go through the process. So patient or the family calls, whomever it is. Hi, my dad, has Parkinson's disease and his family doctor would like him to start therapy. I found you online and I think, we would like to schedule therapy with you. Okay, great. Well, actually, my name's Tony. I'm the therapist. And before we get started, I'd love to know more about your dad. So let's talk a little bit. Does your dad live independently right now? Yeah, he lives on his own. It's in a house. Okay, great. Is he able to do everything like dressing and bathing and feeding himself? And, does he drive? And so I start going through the process of asking these questions over the phone. Is it an evaluation? No. Is it a screening? Probably. I need to be able to qualify what this person exactly needs, right? And can you tell me a little bit about your dad's past medical history? Has he had any surgeries, orthopedic or otherwise? Has he had any falls? Has he fractured anything? Does he have any problems with confusion, dementia? Has he been, experiencing shortness of breath? Does he have any blood pressure issues? And so as I'm going through my checklist of questions, I'm determining, okay, my state practice act requires that I do a physical therapy evaluation, whether it's for fitness, wellness, performance, or it's for rehabilitation and maintenance. So no matter what, you're going to do an eval. But if you have this telephone checklist in place, you can now determine, okay, based on these answers, it's not medically necessary. So I've classic example. I've got another gentleman that sees me a couple times every year. He's working out in the gym. He's a Medicare beneficiary, but he's completely independent, high functioning, plays golf, plays tennis, runs 5Ks. Like he usually reaches out to me when he tweaked his neck and it's hurting him a little bit, or he tweaked his back and it's hurting a little bit and he wants a couple new exercises to do. Is that medically necessary? In my professional opinion, I would say no. And, this is where the gray area might be. If this guy went to 10 PTs, I think if they were contracted with insurance companies and expecting the insurance company to pay, I think they could justify a medical necessity. I think if they were not contracted and expected the client to pay, I think they could justify not medically necessary services. So where do we make those decisions? And that's where I would say you go to some nationally accepted standards, right? And so go to the Cochrane reviews. I had an interesting time today kind of going through some of these, clicking on some of these links, looking at, what are the outcomes for back school for chronic non-specific low back pain? What does the research say for behavioral treatment for chronic pain? There's absolutely enough gray area, truthfully, in this that I think either side could support their case. And that's the most common argument that I see from clinicians is like, well, you can justify anything. You're right. We can. And that's why our profession struggles so much, is because I can go out there and find just as many articles that tell me manual therapy is no better than sham, whereas somebody else can find just as many articles that say manual therapy is, required and medically necessary and amazing. So It's not so much what camp you're in, whether you believe what you do is medically necessary or not, or any of that. We need to kind of check the ego at the door. You need to decide, what is the experience and the service that I want to provide to the individual? Who is my target demographic, and can I help them? Can I solve their problems? What is the total package that I believe as a clinician is going to be the best way for them to solve the problem that they're dealing with? And within that, what is medically necessary according to the payer's guidelines, the payer's definitions, and what is not? And now this is where I'm going to kind of come to an end here. Danielle, I'll answer you in a second. This is where the beauty of stepping away, stepping outside the box, get away from the model for a second and just use your freedom as a free thinking individual and a professional with years, in many cases, of experience, and say, okay, forget payers, forget all this stuff. This is Bob. Bob came to me with this problem. What do I really think Bob needs to achieve the goals that Bob has requested he achieve? And so I'll tell you right now, for me, while I put my hands on every single patient for the most part that I see in the clinic, no, every piece of manual therapy I do is not medically necessary and shouldn't be billed to the insurance. And that's something that's changed for me over the years, but I'm not a manual therapist. I don't hold sacred any particular system or style or intervention or anything that's out there. For me, the majority of the clients that I see, both in Florida, when I started in a community that was a highly active, highly affluent community of geriatric individuals, to now where I'm more, middle America, Ohio. I've got people who are still working, people who are retired, high school kids. I try to put together the package. And most of what I see in the clinic today is, this person's coming to me with, persistent right shoulder pain. I'll generally classify maybe a tendinopathy, right? What does that mean? To me, the way I see it, they're still functioning, although they're frustrated by pain. They're still able to do the things they need to do to fulfill their role in society. But counter to that, in addition to the shoulder pain, many of them, we're talking adults here, they're overweight, they're, deconditioned, they're hypertensive, they have high blood sugar, they have all these symptoms associated with what we could call metabolic syndrome, or anything that you want to, a basket of lifestyle issues. And so when I really look at a lot of my patients, truthfully, that are not post-operative patient referrals, that are not acute injuries, like they didn't fall off a ladder, they didn't get hit by a car. These are people that have just had orthopedic pain develop without any associated tissue trauma or injury or damage or history of, an accident. They just need to get in shape. Like, they need some motivation. They need to be educated to let them know, look, we don't need to catastrophize what's going on. We don't need to over medicalize what's going on. Like, when I don't feel good, my joints hurt, right? There's lots of reasons why pain exists, but that doesn't mean that you have a specific injury. And I think that you can get significantly improved outcomes with these things, and these are covered by Medicare and these are not, and we're going to put them together, and so here's your program. I think this is, whatever it may be, therapeutic activity for 15 minutes to teach you how to do certain things, covered by Medicare. 25 minutes of massage therapy, not a covered service, not required, not medically necessary, but I think it would benefit you. I think you would feel good. I think it would improve your motivation and improve your compliance. This is the self-pay cost for this non-covered service, right? Access to the fitness center to carry out your program. This is what it costs. It's not a covered service. So I think we can use kind of this a la carte system that allows you to combine covered services and non-covered services to achieve the optimal outcome. Problem is, you can't do that if you're not contracted with Medicare, unless, and this is long story to get to where I was coming, unless you make professional relationships, unless you network with other providers who are participating, non-participating. And that's where I go back to get out there, shake hands, go to pub nights, get to know clinicians in your community so that when that patient, when Bob comes to you and you determine this really needs a physical therapy evaluation as a covered service, and I'm not affiliated with Medicare, so I'm going to send him to Dan. Bob, Dan's a physical therapist. He works at Athletico. He does an amazing job. I really, based on what you've told me, I really think you should go see Dan, the physical therapist. He's going to get you set up. He's going to do an evaluation. All those services will be covered by Medicare. And if you want, I can provide you with the stuff that's not covered by Medicare and the stuff that Dan really can't provide you with, because in that environment, Dan doesn't have the time to do these manual therapy techniques that I think will help, but aren't necessarily required. Dan doesn't have the time to talk about nutrition and sleep and lifestyle and stress and all these other things. Dan unfortunately can't help you do the things you need to do that you realize you just need to do them, right? Like Dan, Medicare doesn't pay someone to motivate you and get you excited and make it enjoyable. That's what I do. So I hope that was helpful. Let me see if I can read some of these comments. So Danielle, you were saying, do you have a checklist in a document? Reason I asked is because in the process of developing systems for my outpatient practice, and I also just recently got approved. Okay, so I have my checklist. Yes. Is it something that you can use? Probably not. And this is something like, not promoting anything, but when we go through the Medicare course that I teach on how to bill Medicare and all that stuff, there's a lot of stuff that I share, and I'm happy to share anything. Like, I don't care. Nothing I have is sacred or private or anything. But there's something to be said for you creating your own, because it's just like if I come to you as a patient, you lifting the weight doesn't make me stronger. I have to put the time and the reps in. You as the clinician going through the information, going through the literature, and really pulling out the stuff that resonates with you, that makes sense to you, is the value and is the most important part of the process. So while I could give you a checklist that I use, it's not going to be half as effective as you going in, finding the stuff in the Medicare guidelines, the links that I shared here, to create your own checklist. That you have to do the reps. You have to put the time in. Can you also let me know exactly how you navigate to that? Yeah. Literally, because I found it and then I forgot. Let me go back here. I'll show you the Google search. Cochrane review, low back pain. I typed that in and it took me right here. Sorry about that. I hate text notifications. And that's what, I just typed that in because I remembered from before that I would literally start to go through and create your own list of professionally accepted standards. And obviously, if you're looking, to support one bias or another, you're going to find what you're looking for because it's out there. But I would say that if you use your clinical judgment, you've got the best chance of creating the optimal package for your patient. And it doesn't always have to be all about you, obviously. Like, include the other professionals, open the door. If you let a contracted therapist do the coverage stuff, the world is at your door in terms of providing the stuff that's not covered. So if someone, excuse me, is DC'd from PT with Parkinson's, goodness, and they want to continue self-pay, then because it's not medically necessary, do you personally you get an involuntary? Okay. Um, Jennifer, so because I am contracted, yeah, I would do a voluntary ABN. I would not submit it. I'm not submitting claims for a post therapy Parkinson's program. I did a whole video on this not too long ago, so I'm not sure if you saw it. But if patient went to PT, whether they did one visit of PT and got a program and discharged, or they did 36 visits of PT, if they finish, they come to see me, and I'm going to take them into a self-pay Parkinson's program, right? I will have them sign a voluntary ABN. It will stay in my record for the individual, because remember, I'm still documenting, I'm still keeping track and, doing all that stuff. But I'm not submitting claims to Medicare. And on the ABN explains why this is not covered services, because the patient has already completed their course of therapy. And now the focus is on continuation and performing the exercises as prescribed. Certainly a once every month, 3 months, 6 month, follow up with a contracted therapist would be reasonable, medically necessary, covered service. They would get an updated program. And that's where, again, if you're contracted, you do the covered, skilled services that require the skill of a therapist, but then you drop the person back into the self-pay program. And that self-pay program doesn't have to be expensive. That's what I tell people. Like, we don't, mobile PTs, smaller operators, we don't live in the middle of the bell curve. We live on the extremes. So where I might have a program where I do a one-time initial evaluation, plan of care, consultation, and charge $500 for it. On the flip side, I have a program in my clinic where somebody could come for unlimited, services for $100 a month. They're not covered services, but it's already been determined either through a screening process or through the covered evaluation that was performed. So you have to understand the guidelines. You have to dig into the literature. And more important than anything else, there is no right or wrong right now. It's finding the information, extracting it from what's out there, creating a sensible policy that you can follow that supports your clinical decision-making. And then if you want to go the extra step, go grab an attorney, review it with them, because at the end of the day, you could be 1,000% right. And we've seen this over and over and over again. You could be 1,000% right. You don't want to be the one battling in a legal case because somebody said you're wrong. Doesn't help you to win your case and be $500,000 in debt for legal fees. So that's not a good note to leave on. I don't know what to tell you guys, but I just want you guys to see where the resources are. I want you guys to open up kind of to the idea that maybe it doesn't have to be black and white. Maybe there can be a combination of hybrid, models where there are some covered services that coexist with non-covered services, that just because we've used the terminology non-skilled doesn't mean that it doesn't require intelligence and skill to perform. It just means that, does it require the skills of a physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist to provide this? Is this what we went to school for? Is this what we learned? I think we've just, in my environment, pushed the boundaries too far, where I'm not talking about, involved neurologic cases. I'm not talking about involved pediatric cases. I'm not talking about necessarily post-surgical cases. I'm talking about these individuals that are fully functional, independent, living in the community. They're just dealing with nuisance symptoms. Pain bugs me, but it doesn't stop me from doing what I need to do. I want to get better. I want to enjoy life. I want to run and play golf in my 60s and 70s. These are the clients that we're talking about. So don't misunderstand that I'm saying, I'm going to take away coverage for Betty, who's suffering from Parkinson's disease and BPPV, and she's been having all these complications. No, like, she requires the skills of a therapist. Let her receive what she needs, covered by the benefit she's worked her entire life for. But for John, who was swinging a golf club and he woke up with neck pain, he's probably going to get better no matter what, right? Or he's had pain for 10 years. He's been surviving and doing fine with it. He's not debilitated. Like, clear the red flags, make sure he's not at risk for further injury, and then let him pay for the services he wants. Don't limit him by the coverage that he has. All right. I went way too long, guys. I apologize. I have a bunch of your videos to catch up on still. Thanks. Just wanted to make sure that I was on the right track. It can be hard. So many practices do it different. It is. You know, Jennifer, like, this for me, the last 5 years has just been completely crazy in terms of everything I thought I knew to everything I realized I don't know. And I've never claimed to be the best therapist or amazing at this or that or anything like that. Like, I do the best that I can. I learn every single day. But it is an ethical challenge for me every day that I run and operate my private practice, because it is getting harder and harder for the clientele that I treat, to really provide what I would consider covered services. And that's why I've changed. If you follow anything that I put out, you know that I've moved away from providing like general orthopedic care, and I'm trying to focus on total knee replacement. And I just want to see post-operative total knee referrals and post-op rotator cuff repairs, because I believe they do require the skills of a therapist. I believe there is an opportunity for non-covered services within that demographic. And I feel like the ethical dilemmas are minimized by really focusing on one patient population. So, you know, that's the way I've kind of tried to reconcile what's going on in the profession. But I don't envy the others who are still trying to navigate the conventional care model, third-party payers, and really making these kinds of ethical decisions. All right, guys, enjoy your Sunday. I hope you've had an amazing start to the new year. And if you have any other questions, just keep posting them on this thread. I need to go catch up with my family, but I wish you the best. And David, once again, thank you so much for letting me come on. I got to figure out how to wrap this up.